What are you feeding your mind right now? If it's social media, are you tired of doom scrolling through the angry comment sections and political rants yet? What if you use that time to actually fix your marriage? Welcome to the free Married and Connected School Community. It's like social media, but without the ads, without the judgment, and without the noise. Just real self-paced tools that get you out of that roommate phase starting today. Inside, you get an exact blueprint for a weekly State of the Union meeting with your spouse. We're cutting mental load, we're stopping miscommunications, and we're breaking that exhausting loop of doom argument once and for all. Plus, you get instant access to workshops on overcoming resentment and bringing the actual fun back into your marriage. We have a dedicated space just for guys jumping into Forging Fortitude. It's a 10-week intensive to help you step into your masculine leadership and become the husband and man that God called you to be. And for ladies joining Edifying Eden, we're stepping out of that controlling, nagging era into our soft, nurturing, feminine era, even if your husband hasn't taken the reins yet. Either way, you can take responsibility for your side of the street. Stop scrolling the internet and start investing in your home. The community is 100% free with options to purchase certain courses. Click the link in the show notes and join the Married and Connected School Community today. I'll see you inside. Marriage isn't supposed to feel like roommates, but it doesn't have to feel like a war either. Hi, I'm Kameran Alareqi, certified marriage coach and a relationship expert. Every week on Married and Connected, I bring you real talk, hard truths, and practical tools you can start using right away. Whether you've been married 2 years or 42, this is where you'll find hope, encouragement, and steps that actually work. So let's make your marriage feel good again, starting right now. Welcome back to another episode of the Married and Connected podcast. I'm your host, Kameran Alareqi. Today we are taking a deep dive into something that is coming up pretty frequently in the couples that I am coaching and is also a factor in almost every marital breakdown that I've ever seen. So every explosive argument with your partner that you have, every moment of emotional disconnect with your kids, this is where it's at. This is the topic. And that is ego. We're talking about ego. Now, when a lot of people hear the word ego, they think of a lot of arrogance, somebody who's narcissistic or like strutting around with this overinflated sense of self-importance. But the ego is a lot more subtle, honestly, a lot more dangerous because it's more than just simple vanity. It's not just protecting your image. It's basically the bedrock of all of your relational defenses. And by the end of this episode, you're going to understand the psychological purpose of the ego and how it is probably one of the reasons that you're having so many communication problems, which if you've listened to a few episodes back, probably not communication. It's actually probably emotional safety and the lack thereof. And that is the problem, is that your ego gets in the way of providing emotional safety for your partner. So this is one of the leading drivers of divorce. And most importantly, you're going to figure out how to recognize when your ego is the one steering the ship so that you can step back and actually start focusing more on connection than on protecting yourself. So what is the ego really? To understand why the ego causes so many problems and so much damage in our homes, we first have to understand why we even have this in the first place. So Sigmund Freud, we've all heard of Freud, which, by the way, if you have not taken a deep dive down his philosophies and like read one of his biography, wild what this guy, like how he thought and why he thought the way he thought, wild. Okay. Anyways, his theories were later expanded on by structural ego psychologists like Anna Freud. They all basically came to the conclusion that the ego is not evil. From an evolutionary and psychological perspective, your ego has one job. It's to protect and adapt. That's it. Protect and adapt. However, here's the thing. The ego is the executive part of your personality that mediates between your primal drives, your core fears, your desires, your impulses, and the external demands of reality. So basically, we talk about attachment styles on here all the time. We talk about emotional sobriety. All of that goes together. So it's your attachment styles and your emotional sobriety and the difference between that and the reality of what you're living. The primary objective of your ego is to keep your self-concept intact and protect you from pain, shame, rejection, emotional vulnerability, all of these things. So think of your ego as your internal security system. When you were young, if you experienced rejection, emotional inconsistency with your parents or caregivers, you were criticized a lot, your developing ego constructed defense mechanisms. So if you're new here, we talk a lot about Dr. Andrea Vitz. She's been on the show several different times, and she is the founder of the Emotional Sobriety movement. It's the coaching program that I went through that is basically the reason that I am such a better person now than I ever was before. But she explains that the ego acts as the gatekeeper of your perspective. So if you've ever felt like you and your partner are just not even in the same library when you guys are discussing things, this is why. Your ego is keeping one or probably both of you from seeing the other person's perspective. It filters every piece of incoming information, including feedback from your spouse on what you are or are not doing, through the lens of your unexamined core beliefs, your fear, and your self-preservation. I also recently read the book, The Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. Phenomenal book, if you have not read that. He defines this relational ego as an unhealthy belief in our own importance. And there's a desperate need for status and control and external validation within human beings. He also says that ego tells us that we're special and that normal rules don't apply to us and that we always have to protect our story. Seems a little bit ludicrous, right? Here's the problem with all of it. The ego's entire design is built for survival, not for intimacy. So if you've ever thought, you're treating me like your enemy, why are you treating me like your enemy? This is why. Because your ego is in the driver's seat. You feel like the people who love you the most in this world are attacking you, not trying to get closer to you. And that's usually people's intentions. So if we're going to give each other the benefit of the doubt more often, we have to check our ego. Intimacy. So in the baseball system, we talk about emotional safety. If your ego is in the driver's seat, you're never going to have emotional safety. Second base is connection. You're never going to be completely connected if one of you is led by your ego all the time. Emotional intimacy, that is the idea that we all want to be loved. Well, you can't be loved unless you're fully known. You can't be fully known unless you're fully vulnerable. And you can't be fully vulnerable unless you have a little bit of humility or a lot of bit of humility. Intimacy requires that openness, the vulnerability, the yielding to your other partner, admitting fault, taking accountability, having that humility. Survival is the opposite. It requires armor and control and vigilance and self-justification and even manipulation in some aspects. Complete opposite of what intimacy is. So when you bring a survival system into a romantic partnership or even a parenting dynamic, the very mechanism designed to keep you safe is the very mechanism that ends up destroying the relationship. Now, to catch ego in real time, you have to know how it operates internally and externally, both for the person protecting their ego and for your partner receiving it, because there's a level of ignorance there that we also have to take into account. Ignorance doesn't just mean what you don't know. It also means what you're willing or unwilling to look at. And in this case, it's the ignorance of what you're unwilling to look at in how you're creating an experience for your partner. So for the person protecting their ego, this is going to feel like a physical and somatic. So what it feels like for the person protecting their ego in both a physical and somatic way, it may be like this sudden surge of internal heat. So your whole body feels hot, or you might start sweating. You feel tightness in your chest or in your stomach. You might clench your jaw. You might start getting a racing heart or heart palpitations. You might get like a sudden icy feeling in your fingertips. Like I get it if I drink energy drinks like that, what is it? The nitrogen? I think it's nitrogen. I don't know. I failed chemistry. Either way, it's like numbness. There's this compulsive urge to interrupt or correct or shut down completely. That is what it feels like for you. The internal dialogue in your head may be, oh my God, they think they're so perfect. I'm going to remind them of what they did last month. So you're bringing up things that happened in the past, and you're bringing up all of the historical data to prove why you're right. Or you may think like, well, if I back down now, then I'm a doormat. I'm letting them walk all over me. Or, okay, if I admit that I was wrong, then they're going to use it against me later. They don't appreciate anything I do. I do everything around here. Even if you're thinking those things, your ego is still in the driver's seat. What it sounds like out loud is deflection. Your partner says something to you and you say, okay, well, what about when you did this? What about when they say something like, oh my God, you're so crazy. You're so dramatic. You're overreacting. That's not what happened at all. They're invalidating your experience. You have martyrdom. Fine. I guess I'm just the worst partner in the world then. I don't even know why you're with me. You're controlling by withdrawing. Oh my, I'm done talking about this. I'm done. So for the partner receiving the ego response, what it feels like is that you're always walking on eggshells. You have this profound amount of emotional exhaustion with your partner. There's loneliness. You're feeling uncalculated, unseen, unheard, misunderstood. There's this sense that you are fighting a wall rather than a human being. The internal dialogue that you have is, I can't bring up anything without it turning into a fight. Or it doesn't matter how I say it or how gently I say it, they only hear it as an attack. Or I feel like I'm living with a roommate who's constantly keeping score of what I do and do not do right. What it looks like relationally is this gradual withdrawal of bids for connection. So the way that I explain it in the baseball system is that you're striking out and striking out and striking out, and you're going longer and longer and longer periods of time between your partner pitching to you or coming to you to talk about anything and you getting to bat. The receiving partner stops sharing their true feelings, stops asking for what they need, and they're slowly checking out emotionally. Now, if you are a dismissive avoidant, there's a really good chance that the relationship starts feeling better to you, but it actually is feeling worse to your partner because they're feeling checked out. So the question we have to ask ourselves here is, why does the ego lead us straight to divorce or emotional detachment? Well, Dr. Gottman says that we see that marriages rarely end because of a lack of love. They end because of accumulated emotional erosion caused by the ego threat response system. When your partner critiques you or expresses disappointment, a healthy, regulated person hears, oh, my partner has a need here. An ego-driven self perceives a threat to their identity. That ego, when we break it down, your ego isn't always this arrogant thing. A lot of times, your ego can still be in the driver's seat, and it can be as subtle as not feeling like you're worthy enough because your partner doesn't feel like you are, or it doesn't seem like your partner feels like you are. So when the ego feels threatened, it deploys 4 distinct psychological defense mechanisms. First one is defensiveness and counterattacking. So instead of receiving feedback, the ego immediately redirects. So if your spouse says something like, hey, I felt hurt when you forgot to call, your ego responds with, why should I have to call you? Why should I have to tell you every move that I'm going to make? Or, well, you forgot to do X, Y, and Z. Research on ego defensiveness shows that this is an attempt to preserve self-representation. The ego cannot tolerate being the bad guy in the story. Even if your partner isn't coming right out and saying, you're the bad guy, that's what you're filtering it through. So it forces this competitive scorekeeping dynamic. Second way that it happens is splitting and personalizing. So it's like this black and white thinking. There is no gray area. Splitting is a defense mechanism in clinical literature where the mind categorizes situations as this is entirely good or this is entirely bad. 2 things cannot exist at the same time. There is no gray area. And the ego forces us to take everything personally, which turns our partner's human mistakes or bad days into this idea that it's a direct offense against us. In marriage, it sounds like I'm the long-suffering, reasonable partner, and you are the selfish, flawed partner. It strips away empathy and completely prevents you from seeing your spouse as this whole complex human being. You saw them like that when you were dating, but now your love has become completely conditional because you're seeing them through that black and white thinking. The third way this happens is a demand for superiority. And this one happens really, really subtly. So anytime you're arguing with your partner And there's this idea that they're wrong and you're right, or you're just vehemently trying to convince them that they need to come to your side, that they need to see things the way you see. Or anytime feeling heard actually breaks down to you don't feel heard if they don't say you're right. That's what this is. So you have this idea that you have to be right instead of being connected. And in his book that I read, The Ego is the Enemy, Ryan Holiday addresses this pretty directly. The ego hates silence. It hates learning. It demands validation. So, in studies examining self-esteem and ego threat, individuals with vulnerable egos actively put down others to preserve their own self-worth. It's a power move. In your home, it looks like needing to win every argument. But here's the problem. When you win an argument against your spouse, you guys are a team. So the whole marriage loses. You may have, this is where you may have won the battle, but you lost the war comes in. Absolutely applies. The ego demands victory, where intimacy demands understanding. You're listening to respond instead of listening to understand. The fourth one, we talk about this pretty frequently when we mention the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse from Gottman, stonewalling and withdrawal. Ego defense isn't always loud. It's not always combative. It doesn't always sound like you coming back to quote unquote defend yourself. A lot of times it looks like a complete emotional shutdown or the silent treatment. Psychologically, this is an ego strategy to maintain control. I see this pretty frequently. I see this on both sides of the street. So what it looks like in men is that a lot of times they will still give affection to their children. They're hugging on their kids. They're kissing on their kids. They're still playing with their kids, things like that. But if their wife has made them mad, then they withhold that affection from their wife. From women, I see it as an ego strategy to control by you completely pull back, like you're not doing as much for your partner. You're not, oh, yeah, I didn't cook dinner tonight because nobody around here appreciates me. Oh, yeah, I didn't do the dishes because, I don't do anything anyway. Things like that. Like it's the passive aggressiveness where for men, it's just complete pullback. So either way, you're withholding something that normally you would be giving. And that is your ego shielding itself from accountability while also punishing the other person in your partnership. Now, since this is so near and dear to me, we're seeing a rise in the divorce rate, right? It's almost 60% at this point. The ego is driving that because it tricks you into thinking that you don't love your partner anymore, when in reality, you're just emotionally exhausted. You feel hopeless. You feel helpless. You don't have the tools that you need. It hardens your heart. Instead of moving towards connection, instead of understanding, instead of coming to a solution versus feeling like the person who has vowed to love you the most in this life, you believe that they're attacking you instead of giving them the benefit of the doubt and believing that they're a good person. So when two people spend years in this ego defense mode, the brain starts running deep paths to associate your partner with threat and exhaustion rather than safety and intimacy. And this is where I see that black and white thinking even more, because you start developing what's called negative sentiment override. You start looking at every single thing that your partner is doing, or the majority that your partner is doing or saying or believing or what have you, as negative versus positive. This is also why people who are divorced have a harder time getting along until it's been years and years and years of them being divorced, because that's all they're focused on is the negatives. Their brain has told them, and remember, we've talked about this so many times, your brain doesn't know the difference between what you tell it and what the reality is. So when the reality is that actually your partner's a really great person, but your ego is in the driver's seat all the time. So you believe that your partner is threatening you, controlling you, manipulating you. They're negative all the time. Then negative, oh my God, we never had any fun together. We're completely different. We just weren't compatible. We wanted two completely different things in life. Most likely not true. Most likely that's just what you're seeing, that black and white thinking. Your ego is causing you to believe all of that. So let's talk about a couple of other things that happen. The first one is ego-induced anhedonia. When your ego keeps your nervous system in a state of this hypervigilance, you lose that ability to feel warmth and tenderness or even affection towards your partner. The love isn't gone. It's just buried under years of these layers of self-protective armor. You got to remove that. It's another analogy that I use all the time is the bricks. You've laid bricks of resentment for your partner until you've got this wall with no window, no door, and no access to your partner. That's ego. That wall is ego. The second thing that happens is the story that the ego creates. So to justify you checking out, your ego invents that narrative that I was talking about. We're not compatible. I don't love them anymore. I'm not attracted to them anymore. I'm not sexually attracted to them anymore. Life would be easier with somebody else. Life would be better with somebody else. It's easier for your ego to believe the love has died than to accept the painful truth of, I'm terrified of being vulnerable and admitting my part in this dynamic. So over time, these ego defenses create an environment of chronic emotional unsafety. You don't have first space in the marriage. Partners stop turning towards each other. You're striking out. You're having to go back to the dugout and wait for another opportunity to bat again. Ego is what keeps us disconnected. You're building resentment, separating your emotional lives, and eventually reaching this emotional detachment or even divorce based on something that's not reality. It's based on what's keeping you surviving versus connected. We're born looking for connection, but we're constantly living in survival mode. The connection is the survival mode because you're always going to survive better together versus being alone. As always, I love to give you ideas of what to do in real life. So to catch your ego in action, you have to know what its internal script sounds like in your daily interactions. It might sound like, well, why should I apologize first when they're the ones that started it? Well, why should I apologize at all? They've never apologized for anything they've ever done. Or, well, they need to earn my respect back before I show any kindness to them. I already know what they're going to say. I'm not listening to this. Or, oh, they're attacking me. They're attacking me, so I'm not even listening to that voice message because it's all negativity anyway. It's like we talked about earlier, well, if I admit that I messed up, they're going to use it against me. So I can't actually say what I did wrong. Ego is also a problem in parenting. If you're an 80s or a 90s baby, like I am, you probably heard several of these. One is, because I said so, that's why. Don't challenge my authority. Or, God, the thought, you don't actually say this out loud, but it's, my God, my child's behavior is an embarrassing reflection on me. Or, I can't actually apologize to my child because it's going to ruin my authority. You notice the theme here? Every single ego statement is rooted in self-preservation, control, and fear. So how do you know if it's ego versus something else? How do you know if you're acting from ego or if you're actually setting a healthy boundary and working from a healthy place? Comes down to your psychological intent and your internal state when you do it. An ego-led response is going to be to protect your self-image, to win, or to control. A healthy self-led response is going to be seeking clarity, repairing, or connecting. Feeling it in your body. If you feel tightness, if you feel heat, if you feel urgency, if you feel the need to defend yourself from an attack, you know that you're in ego. The healthy response is going to be grounded, calm, clear. You feel like you're open. You have like an open heart towards them. That's going to be a healthier way. When you're viewing someone else, if you're ego-led, you're going to feel like they are your opponent, that they're bad, that they're just ridiculous or unreasonable, okay? That they're flawed. That's another big one. You're judging them in some way, shape, or form. Whereas if you are self-led, they're human with a different perspective, and I can be open to that. Maybe I'll learn something from them, something like that. The flexibility, there is none when you're ego-led. It's rigid, it's black and white. You're not open to feedback. You're not open to, you're not curious about their experience. Whereas if you are self-led, you are. You are very open to feedback. You're open to hearing their perspective. You're open to hearing their experience that you created for them. You're curious about that. Why do you feel the way that you do? How did you come to that conclusion? That kind of thing. The outcomes on an ego-led versus self-led, if you are distancing yourself, if there's escalation, if there's isolation, that is ego-led. When you're in a self-led space from that, There's going to be de-escalation. There's going to be mutual safety. Now, here's a trick though, okay? Because I had somebody the other day that asked me about boundaries. You got to be really careful with the boundaries, because when you are ego-led, you are going to have very rigid, very strict boundaries. You're going to be cutting people off. You're going to be, nobody can ask you questions about your life. Nobody can, you don't want to talk about things. You're keeping things hidden. You're keeping secrets, things like that. Whereas, and everything is a boundary. Oh, you crossed my boundaries. You're not respecting my boundaries. Okay. Boundaries are just preferences. Really, that's all they are. They are just preferences. So for that, when you are in a healthy self-led space, if you don't have anything to hide, you don't have a problem talking about yourself or what's going on in your life. Now, if it's some rando that you just met, okay, that's a different story. But if it's people that care about you, that you know well, things like that, have some flexibility with that. Have an open heart. They're trying to connect with you. They're trying to get to know you. They're trying to have closeness with you. There's a reason that they're asking you the questions that they are. They're not attacking you. You're filtering that through your own ego. And of course, there are exceptions to this rule. Like, for instance, you've asked your parents not to give your kid chocolate because it makes them all, wiry or wonky or something like that. You've asked them not to give them food dyes or whatever. And, they're feeding them Cheetos every time you show up. Something like that. Yes. Okay. There's boundaries there. That's not ego-led. That's the health of your child. This is where you got to kind of be careful about your boundaries and really look at yourself and have a lot of insight on yourself. Okay. Dr. Vitz offers a very powerful visualization tool for this called the drone perspective. Imagine flying a drone over your head and watching the interaction from above. If the drone sees you acting out of a desire to defend an old story, prove your worth, punish the other person, that's your ego. If the drone sees you acting from this calm, objective height, seeing both of your goodness and your growth gaps clearly, that's your grounded, self-led self. If this is going to kick in the teeth for you, how do you overcome it? How do we shift out of that ego-driven reactivity and into genuine relational maturity? Well, research in psychological flexibility and contemporary frameworks point to 4 major shifts, okay? 1, practice radical humility. Dr. Vitz, this is one of the things that she really drives home in her program, is that radical humility as the master level of emotional sobriety. True humility isn't thinking less of yourself or playing small. That's humiliation. Okay? Humility is the independence from external validation. It is the state where your ego completely dissolves because you don't need to control how others view you anymore. You operate from this belief that I am as good as this person, but I'm also no better than this person or anyone else. From this vantage point, feedback stops feeling like an attack and can start actually helping your growth. Number 2, maintain an always a student mindset. Holiday emphasizes that the ultimate antidote to ego is maintaining a beginner's mind. In marriage, in parenting, the moment you think that you are an expert on your spouse or your child, that's when your ego takes over. You have to stay curious because as you grow, as time goes by, they are not the same people that they were 6 months, a year, 5 years ago. So you have to trade your ego's demand for certainty. Well, I know why you did that. I know what you're going to say next. I know what you're doing. For being a student that is curious of your partner, of your children. Help me understand what's happening for you in that moment. Help me understand why you thought that. What are your goals? What are your favorites on this? What are your dislikes on that? The third one is build an inner scorecard. Holiday warns against living by an outer scorecard, and a lot of people live this way. If you base your piece on whether you got credit, on whether you won, on whether you looked good or didn't, that's how you know that your ego is in the driver's seat. You have to shift to an inner scorecard. Did I act with integrity? Did I show up with kindness? Did I uphold my values regardless of how my partner reacted? Fourth is you have to separate your worth from the feedback that you're getting. When your partner gives you feedback, your ego panics because it equates making a mistake with being unlovable, being disrespected, being unwanted, not being desired, all of these self-beliefs. You have to train yourself to receive feedback without letting it rewrite your fundamental self-worth. This is where we get the ideology that two things can be true at the same time. You can be a deeply loving, good, generous, kind person who occasionally acts out of frustration and needs to make amends. And that is where repair comes in on your relationship. At the end of the day, the ego promises to keep you safe, but the cost of that is intimacy. It keeps you isolated behind the wall of your own making. It holds the trophy of, look, I'm right, you're wrong, na 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 na. It's childish, while you're also standing in an empty room. You don't have the connection with others that you need because your ego is your best friend. This week, I challenge you to catch your ego in the wild. Dr. Vitz calls it catching the snake in the grass. Notice the moment that your throat tightens, that your voice raises, that your heart closes off. And in that exact second, ask yourself this question. What is the most useful way that I can show up right now? Do you want to protect your ego or do you want to protect your relationship? My advice is to choose the relationship every time. It is a daily practice, but it is the precise path toward a healthy, lasting marriage and a peaceful home. Thanks for listening today. If this episode spoke to you at all, please share it with somebody that you care about. And until next week, stay married and connected. This podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional counseling or therapy. Every couple story is unique, so take what's helpful and leave the rest. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge that neither I, Kameran Alareqi, Married and Connected, or Recognizing Potential Coaching are responsible for any outcomes related to what you apply from this show, especially if you are not a client of mine.